What happens when an undercover CEO steps into his own failing veterinary clinic? Welcome, everyone. If you love stories about justice, redemption, and real leadership, you're in for a treat today. Adrian Wells, the CEO of Wells Veterinary Clinics, built his business to provide compassionate pet care, but when reports of neglect, overworked staff, and corporate greed surfaced, he knew something was wrong. Instead of trusting secondhand reports, he went undercover. And what he found was worse than he imagined. Stay with us as we uncover a powerful story of corruption, change, and the fight to put animal care before profit. Dr. Adrian Wells sat in his office, scrolling through yet another complaint from a frustrated pet owner. The words blurred together. Long wait times, misdiagnosed conditions, rude staff, and excessive costs. It wasn't just one isolated incident. The reports had been piling up for months. Wells Veterinary Clinics, once known for compassionate and top-tier animal care, was slipping into a downward spiral. Pet owners were taking their business elsewhere, and employees were quitting at an alarming rate. Adrian had built this company from the ground up, dedicating years to expanding it into a well-respected chain of clinics. But lately, he barely recognized the business he had once been so proud of. He had tried to fix things from the top. Reports were requested, meetings were held, and his regional manager, Frank Dawson, repeatedly assured him that everything was under control. According to Frank, the real issue was lazy employees who lacked dedication and pet owners who expected too much. But Adrian wasn't buying it. Something was fundamentally broken, and the numbers didn't lie. Revenue was up thanks to cost-cutting strategies that Frank had implemented, but customer satisfaction and staff retention were at an all-time low. Worse, there were whispers of dangerous supply shortages and overworked veterinarians making fatal mistakes. Adrian knew that he couldn't rely on secondhand information anymore. If he wanted the truth, he had to see it for himself. That's when he made his decision. He would go undercover. With a new name, a fake resume, and a scruffy beard to hide his recognizable face, he would pose as Alex Carter, a newly hired veterinary assistant at one of the worst-performing locations, Wells Veterinary Clinic, Eastbrook Branch. No CEO treatment, no corporate privileges, just him, experiencing the reality his employees faced every day. As he packed an old vet tech uniform and looked at himself in the mirror, Adrian couldn't shake the feeling that he had let things spiral out of control. Was the clinic truly in crisis, or had he lost sight of the people who made his business work? There was only one way to find out. Tomorrow, he wouldn't be Dr. Adrian Wells, CEO of a national veterinary chain. He would be Alex Carter, a rookie assistant, stepping into a world of stress, exhaustion, and hidden truths. The moment Adrian, now Alex Carter, stepped into the Eastbrook branch of Wells Veterinary Clinic, he was met with a scene of pure chaos. The waiting area was packed with frustrated pet owners, many standing because the few chairs available were already taken. A golden retriever whined as its owner anxiously checked the time, a cat yowled from inside a carrier, and the receptionist, an overwhelmed young woman in a wrinkled uniform, barely looked up as she muttered, "We're at capacity today. If it's not urgent, you'll have to reschedule." Adrian barely had time to process the overwhelming tension before a voice snapped from across the room. "New guy?" A woman in teal scrubs with deep bags under her eyes and a clipboard clutched tightly in her hands stormed toward him. "Great." He started, caught off guard. "Save it," she cut in, shoving a file into his hands. "Name's Dr. Lisa Monroe, lead veterinarian. This clinic is a war zone, and I don't have time for small talk. You're assisting in exam room 3. Dog with a suspected obstruction. Get moving." Before Adrian could even introduce himself, she was already halfway down the hall, barking orders at another assistant. He exchanged a glance with the receptionist, who sighed. "Welcome to hell," she muttered, before returning to her computer. Navigating the cramped back hallway, Adrian quickly realized just how bad things were. Staff members rushed in every direction, carrying trays of medication, guiding nervous pet owners, and cleaning up spills. The clinic was woefully understaffed, and those who remained were running on fumes. As Adrian pushed open the door to exam room 3, he found a young vet tech, Noah, trying to calm a frantic German shepherd while holding an ancient X-ray machine together with medical tape. "Oh, thank God," Noah muttered. Give me a hand, this thing keeps glitching, and I don't think the doc will let me request a new one." Adrian stepped in, already feeling the first waves of frustration. He had expected a busy clinic, but not a crumbling, understaffed disaster zone. The equipment was outdated, the employees exhausted, and the leadership nowhere in sight. And this was just day one. If this was what his employees faced every day, no wonder they were quitting. By the time Adrian, still operating under the alias Alex Carter, had finished his first few shifts, he saw firsthand how Wells Veterinary Clinic wasn't just struggling, it was on the verge of collapse. It wasn't just the overwhelming number of patients that made every shift exhausting. It was the lack of support, resources, and leadership that had turned each workday into a battle for survival. Vet techs like Noah juggled multiple patients at once, switching between assisting in surgeries, prepping medications, and handling intake, all while barely getting time to breathe, let alone take a break. The receptionist, Maya, faced an endless barrage of phone calls, impatient clients, and insurance paperwork with no backup. And Dr. Lisa Monroe, despite her sharp exterior, was one bad shift away from complete burnout. One afternoon, while assisting with a kitten suffering from respiratory distress, Adrian noticed Lisa massaging her temples between patients. "When was your last break?" he asked. Lisa scoffed, not even looking up from her chart. "Breaks? Haven't had one of those in years." It wasn't an exaggeration. The schedules were brutal, with some employees working 10 to 12-hour shifts without relief. Adrian overheard two vet techs whispering in the supply room. "I can't keep doing this," one muttered. "I worked 3 doubles this week. I barely see my kid." "They won't hire anyone else," the other responded bitterly. "Every time someone quits, management just stretches us thinner instead of replacing them." It became clear to Adrian that cost-cutting decisions from upper management were bleeding this clinic dry. Corporate's refusal to invest in additional staff and proper equipment meant that the employees left behind were forced to carry an impossible load. And what was their reward? Minimal pay, constant exhaustion, and the knowledge that they were replaceable. The neglect wasn't just affecting the staff, it was hurting the animals, too. A golden retriever with a torn ligament had to wait 2 extra days for surgery because the clinic didn't have enough doctors available. A senior cat needing urgent blood work had its test delayed because the lab equipment was malfunctioning and hadn't been serviced in months. One evening, as Adrian helped clean up after a long shift, Noah sighed and leaned against the counter. "People don't quit this job because they don't care," he muttered. "They quit because they do, and it's breaking them." Adrian swallowed hard. He had built this company to help animals, but right now it was crushing the people trying to save them. Adrian had seen the warning signs, the exhausted staff, the faulty equipment, the corporate neglect, but nothing prepared him for the moment when everything finally fell apart. It started with an emergency call just after 6 p.m. A panicked woman rushed into the clinic, carrying a small, trembling Labrador puppy in her arms. "He's choking," she cried, tears streaking down her face. The puppy's breathing was ragged, his gums turning a dangerous shade of blue. Lisa and Adrian sprang into action. "We need oxygen now," Lisa ordered, but the oxygen tanks were already in use for another patient. Adrian looked to Noah, who was frantically searching for a spare tank. "There's none left," Noah called back, his voice tight with frustration. Adrian's heart pounded. "What about the new shipment?" Maya, who had just run into the room, shook her head. "Delayed. The corporation didn't approve the extra stock this month." Lisa's jaw clenched, but she didn't stop working. She moved swiftly, trying to clear the blockage in the puppy's throat while rationing the little oxygen they had left. But Adrian could see. This wasn't enough. The lack of basic supplies, the dangerous shortages, the impossible workloads, it had finally caught up to them. They fought for 10 excruciating minutes, but it was too late. The puppy let out one final, weak gasp before his tiny body went limp in Lisa's hands. Silence fell over the room. The woman's sobs shattered the moment. "He was just a baby," she whispered, her body shaking as she clutched the motionless pup. "I brought him here to save him." Lisa stood there, frozen. Her hands were still covered in the puppy's fur, her breathing shallow. Adrian saw something shift in her eyes, something breaking. She ripped off her gloves and stormed out of the room, slamming the supply cabinet so hard it rattled the shelves. Adrian found her outside, gripping the railing of the back entrance, her entire body trembling. "This didn't have to happen," she choked out, her voice filled with fury. "We should have had the oxygen. We should have had the staff to respond faster. But we didn't. Because this place is a damn disaster." Adrian didn't argue. He couldn't. She was right. Inside, the clinic was silent. Noah, Maya, and the rest of the team stood in shock, grief etched into their faces. It wasn't just about this puppy. It was the hundreds of patients they had struggled to save despite impossible conditions. The weight of every failure, every preventable tragedy, was finally too much. Adrian clenched his fists. This wasn't just a bad shift. This was a system that had been broken for too long. And now he had no choice but to fix it. The morning after the tragedy, Adrian walked into the clinic with a new purpose. He was done watching from the sidelines. It was time to take back control. With his disguise still intact, he went straight to the clinic's back office, where Dr. Owen Turner, the regional director, sat sipping coffee behind a desk cluttered with untouched paperwork. He barely looked up when Adrian walked in. "What do you want?" Owen muttered, his tone dismissive. Adrian slammed a thick folder onto the desk, the contents spilling out. Evidence of mismanagement, ignored supply requests, complaints from staff, and patient records showing preventable complications due to resource shortages. Owen frowned. "What the hell is this?" Adrian's voice was calm, but his words cut like a blade. "This is proof that Guardian Vet isn't failing because of the staff, it's failing because of you." Owen scoffed, leaning back in his chair. "You don't know how things work, rookie. We make tough choices to keep the clinic running. Supplies aren't infinite. Neither is money." Adrian's jaw tightened. "You approved corporate bonuses but denied emergency equipment requests. You cut staff hours to save costs, knowing it put patients at risk. And last night, because of your greed, an innocent puppy died." Owen's smirk faltered, but he quickly regained his composure. "That's how business works, kid. Some sacrifices have to be made." Adrian took a deep breath, then reached into his pocket and pulled out his real ID, the one with his full name, Adrian Caldwell, CEO of Guardian Vet. The color drained from Owen's face. "You," he stammered, his voice cracking. Adrian's eyes burned with unwavering authority. "I've been undercover in this clinic for a week. I've seen how you run things. The way you ignore your own employees, dismiss patient care, and put profits over lives. And as of this moment, you're done here." Owen shot up from his chair, his face twisted with anger. "You can't just—" "Oh, I can," Adrian interrupted, stepping closer. "And I already have. Corporate is on their way. The board has seen the reports, the supply orders you ignored, the money you funneled into executive perks instead of patient care. I've sent them everything." Owen's bravado crumbled. He glanced toward the door, where several employees, Lisa, Noah, Maya, and other staff, had gathered, listening to every word. Their faces were hard, filled with years of frustration, exhaustion, and now, vindication. "You're fired, Owen," Adrian said firmly. "Pack your things and get out." For the first time, Owen Turner had no words. He stormed out of the office, pushing past the staff without meeting their eyes. Silence hung heavy in the air. Then Lisa stepped forward. "Is this real?" she asked, almost afraid to believe it. Adrian met her gaze. "Yes, and this is just the beginning." For the first time since stepping into the clinic, the weight started to lift. The corruption was being cut out, but the real work was just getting started. With Owen Turner gone, the real work began. Adrian knew that firing one corrupt manager wouldn't fix everything overnight. Wells Veterinary Clinics needed a complete overhaul, starting from the ground up. His first priority? The staff. The same people who had been overworked and unheard were the backbone of the clinic, and they needed support immediately. Adrian doubled the hiring efforts, bringing in additional veterinarians, vet techs, and receptionists to ease the overwhelming workload. Overtime was no longer mandatory, and shifts were restructured so that no one had to sacrifice their personal well-being just to keep the clinic running. Next came resources. Adrian personally reviewed every ignored supply request, ensuring that equipment like IV pumps, anesthesia machines, and stock medication cabinets were in place. Broken tools were replaced, and an emergency fund was established so that the clinic would never have to turn away an animal in distress due to a lack of resources. But beyond logistics, the clinic's entire culture had to change. For too long, Wells veterinary clinics had operated under fear and exhaustion. Employees were terrified to speak up, knowing their concerns would be dismissed. That ended now. Adrian implemented an open-door policy, making sure that anyone, from veterinarians to front desk staff, could voice their concerns without fear of retaliation. During a staff meeting, he made it clear, "I know this place has been broken for a long time," Adrian said, looking each person in the eye. "And that's on me. I trusted the wrong people to run it. But starting today, that changes." At first there was hesitation. Years of neglect didn't just disappear overnight, but slowly people started to believe. A week after the reforms began, Lisa stopped Adrian in the hallway. "You actually meant it," she said, a little stunned. "I thought we'd get some empty promises and a memo, but things are actually getting better." Adrian nodded. "Because this place should never have been run on fear. It should have been run on care. For the animals, for the staff, and for the people who trust us with their pets." And just like that, Wells veterinary clinics started to heal. For the first time in years, employees weren't just surviving their shifts, they were starting to love their work again. And that was the true foundation for lasting change. Frank Dawson stood outside Wells veterinary clinic gripping the strap of his bag. He had once been Owen Turner's enforcer, the assistant manager who turned a blind eye to shortages, mistreatment, and reckless cost-cutting decisions. Now Owen was gone, and Frank was left to face the consequences of his own choices. When he stepped inside, the tension was immediate. Staff members who had once been forced to follow his orders now eyed him with skepticism and resentment. Lisa, the lead vet tech, crossed her arms. "What are you doing here?" she asked coldly. Frank exhaled, forcing himself to meet her gaze. "I know I don't deserve a second chance," he admitted, "but I want one." Adrian had expected this moment. When Frank requested a meeting, he had agreed. Not because he was soft, but because he believed in redemption through action, not words. "You don't get your old job back," Adrian said, his tone firm but fair. "If you want to stay, you start from the bottom. No authority, no shortcuts. You'll work under the same people you once ignored, and you'll prove that you've changed." Frank nodded without hesitation. "I'll do whatever it takes." The real test came 2 weeks later. A frantic family rushed in with a dying stray, one that should have been treated immediately but under Owen's rule would have been turned away for not being profitable. Without waiting for approval, Frank jumped into action, stabilizing the animal, assisting the vet, and ensuring that it got the care it needed. For the first time, Frank wasn't just following orders. He was making things right. Adrian Wells stood outside Wells Veterinary Clinic, watching as a young couple carried their newly adopted dog out the front doors, relief and gratitude clear on their faces. Just months ago, this clinic had been a broken, understaffed, and profit-driven machine, prioritizing finances over the well-being of animals. Now, it was on its way to becoming everything it was meant to be, a place where every patient mattered, regardless of their owner's wallet size. The changes hadn't been easy. Adrian had overhauled everything, from hiring more qualified staff and increasing wages to ensuring necessary medical supplies were always available. The once exhausted, disheartened team now moved with purpose, knowing their hard work was valued. Even Frank Dawson, once Owen's right-hand enforcer, had slowly begun earning back trust. He had taken on the most difficult cases, helped in emergencies, and shown that he was no longer the man who looked the other way when pets were denied care. Redemption took time, but Frank was proving it wasn't just a hollow promise. The real victory, though, was in the animals and their owners. No longer were sick pets left untreated due to corporate greed. No longer did the staff feel powerless against unfair policies. Wells Veterinary Clinic was becoming a model of ethical, compassionate care, where the focus wasn't just on profits, but on saving lives. As Adrian walked back into the clinic, he knew this was just the beginning. There was still work to do, more clinics to fix, more policies to change, but for the first time he felt hope. Because now, Wells Veterinary Clinic stood for something greater than money. It stood for the animals, the people who loved them, and the professionals dedicated to their care. And that was worth fighting for. The story of Wells Veterinary Clinic serves as a powerful reminder that true leadership is about accountability, not authority. Adrian Wells went undercover expecting minor inefficiencies but instead uncovered a system built on overworked employees, neglected patients, and leadership that prioritized profit over proper care. His journey highlights one of the most crucial lessons in any industry. Leaders must actively listen to the people on the ground. It's easy to make decisions from a boardroom, but the real impact of those decisions is felt by the veterinarians, technicians, and staff working tirelessly to keep the clinics running. A major takeaway from Adrian's experience is that cutting costs at the expense of employees and patients leads to long-term failure. When businesses treat their workers as disposable, morale plummets, turnover increases, and ultimately the quality of service suffers. In a field as delicate as veterinary medicine, this doesn't just lead to inconvenience, it leads to avoidable suffering and even preventable deaths. A true leader understands that investing in employees, whether through fair wages, adequate staffing, or mental health support, isn't a luxury, but a necessity. Another key lesson is the importance of ethical responsibility in veterinary care. Frank Dawson and the previous management had prioritized speed and financial gain over patient well-being, turning a compassionate profession into a business machine. But Adrian's reforms proved that a veterinary clinic can be both financially successful and ethically responsible. By enforcing strict medical standards, ensuring fair workloads, and creating a culture of compassion, he rebuilt trust among both employees and pet owners. Most importantly, Adrian learned that real change requires action, not just promises. Many leaders say they care, but few take the bold step of stepping into the shoes of their employees to truly understand their struggles. His experience transformed Wells Veterinary Clinics into a place where employees felt valued, pets received the care they deserved, and leadership truly listened. The lesson is clear: when compassion leads, success follows.